Stop. Look at your bank account. Now, look at the price of your groceries. Look at the skyrocketing rent and the house you can't afford to buy. You think this is just inflation? You think this is just bad luck or the result of a pandemic? You are wrong. What you are feeling right now, the squeezing of the middle class, the transfer of wealth from the poor to the ultra-rich, the terrifying instability of the global markets, didn't start in 2020. It didn't start in 2008. It started with a single decision made by one man in a smoke-filled boardroom in March of 1929. We are taught that the Great Depression was a natural disaster, a storm that just happened. They tell us that people got greedy, stocks went down, and suddenly everyone was poor. That is the official narrative. That is the lie they teach in school to keep you sleeping soundly at night. The truth is much darker, much simpler, and infinitely more terrifying. The Great Depression wasn't a weather event. It was an engineered demolition. It was a crime scene. And for 90 years, the fingerprints of the man who pulled the trigger have been wiped clean from the history books. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a president. He was a banker who decided that he was bigger than the government, bigger than the Federal Reserve, and bigger than God. He built a machine designed to harvest the dreams of the working class and convert them into cold, hard cash for the elite. And when that machine broke, it didn't just break a bank, it broke the world. Today, we are going to expose the calm money conspiracy. We are going to name the man who held the match. And we are going to show you why the exact same trap he set in 1929 has been rearmed and is waiting for you right now. Before we descend into this financial abyss, I need to know who is awake. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments below and hit subscribe to help us spread the truth. Let's rewind to the crime scene. To understand the murder of the global economy, you have to understand the victim, the America of the 1920s. Picture it, the Roaring Twenties. This wasn't just a time of partying. It was a time of unprecedented technological explosion that looks suspiciously like our own. Back then, the miracle wasn't artificial intelligence or the blockchain. It was the radio and the combustion engine. For the first time in history, electricity was flowing into common homes. Ford was pumping out cars that normal people could actually buy. There was a feeling in the air, a thick, intoxicating vapor of optimism. The horrors of World War I were over. The Spanish flu was a distant memory. It was a new era, a new paradigm. Does that phrase ring a bell? It's a new paradigm. This time is different. Sound familiar? In the 1920s, the average American was essentially conservative with their money. They were savers. They didn't gamble. If you had money, you put it in a savings account at a local bank, earning a safe, boring 3% interest. The stock market? That was a closed country club. It was for the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Morgans. It was a playground for the elite, cordoned off by velvet ropes. Less than 1% of the American population owned a single share of stock. And this is where the devil entered the garden. Enter Charles Edwin Mitchell, Sunshine Charlie. Mitchell wasn't born into the elite. He was a farmer's son from Massachusetts. He was a grinder. He was ambitious. And by 1919, he had clawed his way to the top of National City Bank, the institution we now know as Citibank. At the time, National City Bank was the largest bank in the country. It sat on a mountain of cash, $2.7 billion. That's more money than most nations had in their entire treasury. But Mitchell had a problem, a rich person's problem. The bank had too much money sitting around and not enough people to lend it to. He looked at the American public, the factory workers, the farmers, the school teachers, and he didn't see people. He saw an untapped oil field. He saw millions of savings accounts sitting there, unproductive. He had a revolutionary idea, an idea that would plant the seed of every financial crisis for the next century. He asked a simple question: why should the rich have all the fun? He decided to democratize the stock market. He created a subsidiary called the National City Company. This is crucial. This wasn't a bank. It was a sales machine. He hired thousands of young, aggressive salesmen. He didn't hire bankers. He hired hustlers. He stripped them of their ethical codes and trained them in the dark arts of psychological manipulation. He sent them into the bank branches. Imagine walking into your bank today to deposit your paycheck, and instead of a teller, you're cornered by a guy in a sharp suit who tells you that leaving your money in a savings account is for losers. He tells you that if you really loved your family, if you really wanted to be free, you'd buy stock in Radio Corporation of America, RCA. They plastered ads everywhere. Become a partner in American industry. Your children will be proud of you. They used FOMO, fear of missing out, before the acronym even existed. They published stories of secretaries in Ohio who became millionaires overnight. They showed pictures of streetcar drivers buying mansions. They weaponized envy. Think about your Instagram feed right now. Think about the YouTube ads screaming at you to day trade crypto. Think about the apps on your phone, Robinhood, Webull, that gamify your savings, turning investing into a casino with confetti animations when you make a trade. Mitchell was the original finfluencer. He didn't have an iPhone, but he had a sales force that could talk a starving dog off a meat wagon. But selling stocks wasn't enough. The average American didn't have the cash to buy expensive shares. A share of General Motors was expensive. So, Mitchell introduced the poison pill that would kill the economy, buying on margin. This was the innovation. You didn't need $100 to buy $100 worth of stock. You only needed $10. You put down 10% of your own money, and the bank, Mitchell's bank, would lend you the other 90%. It seemed like magic. If the stock went up 10%, you didn't just make a 10% profit. Because you used leverage, you doubled your money. You made 100% profit. The math was intoxicating. A mechanic could put down $50 and control $500 of stock. If that stock went up, he could make more in a week than he made in a year of turning wrenches. Suddenly, nobody wanted to work. Why work at the factory when you can get rich on your lunch break? The volume of loans for stock purchases exploded. From 1925 to 1929, margin loans skyrocketed from $2 billion to $8.5 billion. That is a 425% increase in debt in just 4 years. The entire country became a casino. Teachers mortgaged their homes. Farmers sold their cattle. People borrowed money to buy stocks, then used those stocks as collateral to borrow more money to buy more stocks. It was a pyramid of debt, teetering on the head of a pin. And just like today, where we see record levels of credit card debt and buy now, pay later schemes fueling a lifestyle we can't afford, the 1920s economy wasn't built on production. It was built on paper promises. We are living in the echo of 1929. The technology has changed, the speed has increased, but the human behavior? The greed? The delusion that stocks only go up. It is exactly the same. And just like in 1929, there is a man behind the curtain pulling the levers, waiting for the moment to cash out. But here is where the story shifts from a tragedy of greed to a criminal conspiracy. Because by early 1929, the people in charge, the smart money, knew the party was over. They knew the math didn't add up, and they tried to stop it. But Charles Mitchell wouldn't let them. By the spring of 1929, the smell of smoke was in the air. The Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, the only entity with the power to slow down the economy, woke up. The Federal Reserve Board looked at the numbers and panicked. They saw that the stock market was eating the real economy. Money that should have gone to building factories or planting crops was being sucked into the Wall Street vortex. They realized they were sitting on a nuclear bomb of leverage. So, in February 1929, the Federal Reserve issued a direct action order. This was unprecedented. They sent a secret letter to the major banks. The message was clear: stop lending money for speculation. They threatened to cut off the banks from federal funds. They tightened the screws. They wanted to deflate the bubble slowly, to let the air out before it popped. And it worked. For a few weeks in March 1929, the market started to wobble. The calm money rates spiked to 20%. Cash dried up. The gamblers started to sweat. Stocks began to slide. The bubble was about to deflate in a controlled, manageable correction. The disaster could have been avoided. We could have had a recession of 1929, not a Great Depression. But on March 26, 1929, as panic began to set in on the trading floor, one man stepped out of his office at 55 Wall Street and walked into the firing line. Charles Mitchell. He saw his empire threatened. If the market went down, his National City Company sales force would be out of business. His personal wealth, tied up in stock options, would vanish. He didn't care about the Federal Reserve. He didn't care about the long-term health of the economy. He called a press conference, and he said the words that signed the death warrant for the American dream. He looked the reporters in the eye and said, "I have an obligation which is paramount to any Federal Reserve warning or anything else to avert any dangerous crisis in the money market." He then slapped a check on the table. He announced that National Citibank would pump $25 million of pure liquidity into the market to lower interest rates and keep the gambling going. You have to understand the audacity of this. A private banker publicly told the Central Bank of the United States to go to hell. He single-handedly overrode the government's monetary policy. The market roared back to life. The Mitchell rally sent stocks to dizzying, impossible new heights. He was hailed as a hero. Sunshine Charlie saved the day, but he didn't save anything. He just poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning the house down. You won't believe the receipt is wilder than you think. Because that $25 million? It wasn't his money. It was the depositor's money. And the mechanism he used to deploy it wasn't just a loan. It was a trap door that was about to open under the feet of every man, woman, and child in America. We need to stop looking at the 1929 crash as just stocks going down. We need to look at the mechanics of the collapse, because this is the blueprint for how the elites steal your future. The weapon Charles Mitchell used wasn't the stock itself. It was the call money market. Let's break this down, because this is the complex financial engine they don't want you to understand. In 1929, when you bought a stock on margin, you borrowed money from your broker. But where did the broker get the money? The broker didn't have millions of dollars lying around. The broker borrowed that money from the bank, from Charles Mitchell. This was the call loan. These were loans with no fixed repayment date. The bank could call them in at any moment. Literally give the broker 24 hours to pay back millions of dollars. Here is the deadly feedback loop that Mitchell engineered. 1. The lure. Mitchell's bank takes deposits from grandma and grandpa. They pay grandma 3% interest. 2. The switch. Mitchell lends that money to a Wall Street broker in the call money market at 10%, 12%, sometimes 20% interest. The bank is making a killing. It is parasitic finance at its finest. 3. The leverage. The broker lends that money to you, the retail investor, to buy stocks on margin. 4. The collateral. The stock itself is the collateral. Do you see the flaw? The entire system rested on the price of the stock. As long as stocks went up, everyone got paid. The investor made money, the broker made fees, and Mitchell made massive interest. It was a perpetual money machine. But Mitchell knew the math. He knew that for every $1 of real money in the market, there were $9 of borrowed money. This is called 10-to-1 leverage. In a leverage system, you don't need a disaster to trigger a collapse. You just need a breeze. If the market drops by just 10%, the equity of the margin trader is wiped out. 0. Gone. When that happens, the broker issues a margin call. Mr. Smith, your stock fell. You need to put more cash in your account by 10 a.m. tomorrow, or we sell your stock. But Mr. Smith doesn't have cash. Mr. Smith spent all his cash buying the stock. So the broker sells Mr. Smith's stock instantly. This selling pressure drives the price down further. Now the stock is down 20%. This triggers a margin call from Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones can't pay. His stock is sold. Now the market is down 30%. This is the liquidity death spiral. And Charles Mitchell had wired the entire U.S. banking system directly into this bomb. By the summer of 1929, thanks to Mitchell defying the Fed, the market was trading at valuations that were mathematically impossible. Stocks were trading at 30 to 50 times earnings. For context, historical average is around 15. It was pure hallucination. The smart money, the Kennedys, the Baruchs, the foreign central banks, they saw the cliff. They started quietly selling. They were exiting the burning building while Mitchell was at the front door selling tickets to get in. Then came October 1929. It started with a whisper. The Bank of England raised interest rates. Foreign capital started leaving Wall Street. The liquidity that Mitchell promised began to evaporate. On October 24th, Black Thursday, the first domino fell. A few large sell orders hit the floor. The ticker tape, the communication system of the time, couldn't keep up. The machine was printing prices that were 20 minutes old. Imagine trading on an app today, but the price you see is from 20 minutes ago. You don't know if you're rich or broke. Panic is the most contagious virus on earth. Brokers screamed for cash. They ran to the banks. We need money to cover the margin calls. And this is where Mitchell's system turned on him. The banks saw the prices falling. They realized the collateral, the stocks, were becoming worthless. So, instead of lending more money, the banks called the loans. They told the brokers, pay us back. Now, the brokers had no choice. They had to sell everything. Not just the bad stocks, but the good ones. General Electric, U.S. Steel, AT&T, companies that were actually making money, were sold for pennies just to raise cash to pay back Charles Mitchell's loans. In one single day, 13 million shares changed hands. On Black Tuesday, October 29th, the bottom fell out. The market lost $14 billion in value. To put that in perspective, that was more money than the United States had spent fighting the entirety of World War I, vaporized, in 6 hours. But here's the part that breaks your heart. It wasn't just the speculators who got hurt. Because Mitchell had tied the commercial banks to the stock market, when the market crashed, the banks crashed. Remember Grandma's savings account? The one gaining 3% interest? The one that was safe? It was gone. Mitchell had lent it to the gamblers, and the gamblers had lost it. 5,000 banks collapsed. 9 million savings accounts were wiped out. These weren't investors. These were people saving for retirement, for their children's education, for a rainy day. Mitchell didn't just bankrupt the gamblers. He bankrupted the innocent. The horror stories are endless. Edward Hopkins, a mechanic from Detroit, he invested his life savings of $5,000 in Ford stock. When the crash hit, the bank sold his stock for $200 and then sued him for the remaining debt. He hanged himself in his garage. Mary Caulfield, a teacher, she mortgaged her family home to buy RCA stock on Mitchell's advice. The bank seized the home. 3 generations of her family were thrown onto the street. Suicides in New York jumped by 30%. The clerks at hotels would ask guests checking in, "Do you want a room for sleeping or for jumping?" This wasn't a recession. It was a humanitarian crisis engineered by financial malpractice. And what was Charles Mitchell doing while the bodies hit the pavement? In 1929, while his customers were losing everything, Charles Mitchell paid himself a bonus of $1.2 million. In today's money, that is nearly $20 million. He was the highest-paid banker in America. When later dragged before the Senate to explain himself, his defense was the epitome of elite arrogance. He said, "I only wanted to give people the opportunity to get rich." He blamed the victims. He called it a state of mind. He refused to admit that pumping leveraged liquidity into a bubble was a crime. The devastation was total. Unemployment hit 25%. Industrial production fell by 47%. The GDP of the United States was cut in half. It took a world war and tens of millions of deaths to finally pull the global economy out of the hole that Charles Mitchell dug. After the crash, the government finally acted. They passed the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. This was the most important financial law in history. It built a concrete wall between commercial banks, where you keep your savings, and investment banks, where they gamble on stocks. It made it illegal for a banker to do what Charles Mitchell did. For 60 years, that wall kept us safe. We had stability. We had a middle class. But the bankers never stopped fighting. They hated that wall. They spent billions lobbying to tear it down. And in 1999, they succeeded. The wall was repealed. Since then, we have had the dot-com crash, 2000, the Great Financial Crisis, 2008, the repo crisis, 2019, the inflation crisis, 2022. Do you see the pattern? We are right back in 1929. Today, the call money market is called the repo market. The margin loans are called derivatives. The National City Company is every major too-big-to-fail bank on Wall Street. The leverage in the system today is not 10 to 1. In some sectors of the shadow banking system, it is 100 to 1. The total value of global derivatives, bets on bets on bets, is estimated at over $1 quadrillion. That is more than all the money in the world. We are sitting on a bubble that makes 1929 look like a picnic. And just like Charles Mitchell, the central bankers of today are printing trillions of dollars to keep the illusion alive. They are terrified of the crash, so they are debasing your currency to prop up the stock market. They are sacrificing your grocery bill, your rent, and your savings to save their own skins. The lesson of Charles Mitchell is not about history. It is a warning about human nature. The system is not designed for you. It is designed to extract wealth from the many and funnel it to the few. The question is not, will it happen again? The question is, when? And when the music stops this time, there will be no gold standard to fall back on. There will be no New Deal. Don't be a victim of the next Charles Mitchell. Educate yourself. Diversify. Be skeptical. And most importantly, stop trusting institutions that are built on borrowed time. If you want to survive the coming storm, you need to understand the machine. Share this video with someone who thinks it can't happen here. Waking them up might be the best gift you ever give them. This is Beyond the Ledger, and we are just getting started. Hit subscribe. The truth is coming.